Amy Goodman.
The viewpoints expressed in this program are the opinions of the people expressing them and are not necessarily those of Fresh Air Incorporated, its staff, or its board of directors.
Hi, this is Al McFarland, host of The Conversation with Al McFarland. You're listening to 90.3 FM, KFAI, Minneapolis. I'm Al McFarland. Welcome to The Conversation with Al McFarland. I'm glad to be here and glad to have you along as well. Today is Tuesday, February 17th, 2026, and we want to have a conversation today about things going on in our community and in our world. One of the things that's top of mind for me and many of you will be just noting the life contribution, the life work, and the transition of Reverend Jesse Jackson. And hopefully over the course of the hour, I'll refer to some of the stories that I know about having interacted with him or watching and supporting and sort of being inspired by his leadership, his example, his brilliance, his genius over the lifetime that I have witnessed and watched Reverend Jackson. So also, if you have a Reverend Jesse Jackson story or a question, I'd love to have you in the conversation as well. You can do that in a couple of ways. One is if you are connecting with us on any of the social media platforms, LinkedIn or Twitter or Facebook or YouTube, just drop us a note. We'll watch and monitor the feed. We'd be glad to shout you out and thank you for listening and participating. Yeah, a note already from the Big Cheese. Thank you so much. Rest in peace, Reverend Jesse Jackson. And if you've got a Jesse Jackson story, this is a time to tell it. It's a place where we can celebrate him, celebrate his vision, his work, his leadership, and the impact he had on the world. You know, so on any of the platforms, if you want to come on the show, just drop us a link. In fact, we'll put the QR code on screen and we'll monitor. And if you're interested in being on screen with us on our social media platforms, we'd love to invite you to share in that way as well. Let me begin by sort of telling one of the stories that come to my mind about Reverend Jesse Jackson. And once when he was in the Middle East on a peace mission, I think the effort was when he was trying to connect with the captors in Iraq of, I think it was Lieutenant or Officer Goodwin, I believe was the name, and who'd been shot down. He was an American pilot who was shot down and held captive. And Jesse Jackson, Reverend Jackson, was dispatched himself to intercede on behalf of the airman and his family in an effort to get him released by that country. And so I'm sitting here at home, 2 or 3 in the morning. I get a call from a guy that is a Minneapolis guy, a friend of mine, who had joined Reverend Jackson's staff and who called me from Baghdad. I think it was in Baghdad. And I picked up the phone. Hello, how you doing? He said, Al, that's Jeffrey. I said, hey, Jeff, yeah, I'm calling you from Baghdad. I'm here with the Reverend, and we're here trying to get a release of an American airman. You know the story. I said, what? I couldn't believe it, but I knew that Jeffrey had been hired by and brought on staff as a supporter, intern communications supporter for Reverend Jackson. So I was just quite amazed. And you can imagine that it made me sit up and try to listen, because I think the purpose of the call from my friend Jeffrey was to say, we're here in a precarious situation in Baghdad. We don't know what's going to happen. And I just need somebody to know I was here in case this activity goes terribly wrong. And it was amazing that I had the connection with him. He had the connection with me, that I got the call to at least be a witness to the fact that he was operating with Reverend Jackson in Baghdad on a mission to secure the release of a U.S. airman who had been shot down. Well, if you have Jesse Jackson stories, I'd love to hear them. I've got more that we'll share over the course of the conversation, and love to get a sense of what your stories are, your reservations, your criticism, your praise. I think all of that is appropriate. It's a conversation we simply must have. We cannot remember. We must remember. We cannot forget. That's the point I'm trying to make. I want to go now to a guest who has been with me on several occasions and who is planning with me to do more conversation about the U.S.-Cuba relationship and other relationships of countries that are experiencing and have experienced colonialism, U.S. and Western imperialism, and who still experience stress as a consequence of U.S. policy. Greg Klawe is here. He's with the U.S.-Cuba Committee. Greg, you can tell me the proper name for the organization. I just know you as an advocate and as a person who's passionate about justice and justice for the Cuban people and everybody around the world that's been impacted by imperialism, by the greed. So, Greg, good afternoon. Welcome to the conversation. Good to see you. How you doing, man? Bring Greg in. Let me bring you on stage because I see you in the background. There you are. How you doing, man? Good.
Yeah.
Good.
Thank you, Al. Thank you for this opportunity. Yeah. I think Minnesota can really relate to what is going on in Cuba. Of course, we experience it with a healthy society, with all the tools that we need to keep things going. But Cuba has been a victim of over 65-year-old blockade that has blocked them. It's like going to your bank. You no longer have access to your bank account. It's like going to the gas station, and the gas station sometimes doesn't have any gas. It's like, you want to turn on the lights, but there's no electricity because all these resources are being blockaded by the United States financial system and military system from getting to Cuba in hopes, as the Mallory Doctrine stated in 1960, to starve and deprive the Cuban population from economic prosperity and drive them into chaos and revolt against their own government. And today, what we see with the oil blockade and the dire predictions of what the Cubans will be facing, we see the most severe extension of that policy. And I think it has a very much connection to what's happened in Minnesota these past couple months. And I'll go through that in a few minutes. But I just want to say to people that the fate of the Cuban Revolution is inseparable from the broader historical context between domination and emancipation, between empire and sovereignty, between a world ordered by profit and power and one grounded in human need and collective dignity. So I want to start with that right there. That's powerful in and of itself.
Yes, absolutely. What a wonderful statement, a powerful statement. So to our listeners, if you've got feelings, comments, questions, we'd love to have you engage in this conversation as well. You can connect with us either through YouTube or Facebook or LinkedIn. Those are the channels we're streaming live to. I think we're streaming live to X as well. We'd love to get your feedback and your comments on the question of the relationship between the U.S. and Cuba, the relationship between oppressed people and powers that seek to deprive the many for the benefit of the few. We also, over the course of the hour, want to keep Reverend Jesse Jackson and his family and their work, his work and their work in mind, because it's all related. It's all the same mission that we share for liberation and for freedom of human beings across the planet. So, Greg, go ahead and take us back into the items you said you'd come back to, and that is the story behind the embargo and the recent ratcheting up of the oppression, efforts to further decimate the hopes of the Cuban people because of U.S. policy under the Trump regime. What's the story?
So we know that this has been happening, but what's been turned on its head is the reporting of corporate media, where they've joined to the hip with the oligarchy that runs our government to portray freedom as the freedom that we have to buy any product. Excuse me.
I'm not sure up in there. Go ahead.
The freedom to buy any products, rather than having the freedom to be free of oppression, to be free of the constant worry of health, of having work, of having health, of having education.
Mm-hmm. And we lost your sound for a second there, Greg.
There's no one.
Let's try it again. We lost your sound for a second. Yeah, and somehow you're muted. We'll try to get that connection established again. But it's an important topic, and we are working to actually, in the next week's program or following, talk with people on the ground in Cuba, people who have the ability to sort of share what their daily experiences are and how this intensification of the oil-driven and other policies is really decimating, creating difficulty for people. I think Greg is back. Let me bring you back in, Greg. Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. So the corporate media has turned everything on its head, so that freedom is not the freedom to worry about your everyday existence. You know that the Cuban people have universal health care, universal education, guaranteed to housing. It's written in their constitution as the universal human rights platform is set for the rest of the world. That's where the rest of the world is headed, except for the United States. And so people that do not have the equal opportunity to those things cannot transcend to a higher calling, whether it's a profession, whether it's taking care of a family, whether it's to pursue another career. So Cuba has mandated that be in their constitution. Not only that, but they've mandated protection of the environment in their constitution. It's the first country that has put in the constitution protection of the environment. that it's a human right, or it's the planet's right to have environmental protection. And so how has that been created? It's only been created by a true democracy. Only all the people having the same power, the power of the vote, can be involved in setting the agenda of a nation. Not just the people in power, but all the people. So how do they, why do we say we have democracy, but the majority of the people in the United States say, yes, we should have universal health care. Yes, we should have education for all. Yes, housing should be a guarantee. And we in Minnesota know that we want this, but the majority of the people in our nation don't, but we don't have it. So how is that a democracy? But in Cuba, they have it. It's because they've set up a system that does not require spending money to get into office. They start at the local level. So say we have the wards of Minneapolis. We know the people in our ward, say Robin Wansley. We know Robin Wansley. We know her service to the community. We've elected her. When we elect people to the municipal level, we trust them with with the decisions they make that affects our livelihood. So in Cuba, all the people that have been elected at the municipal level, they will vote on who is going to represent them at the state level, or in Cuba, it's the provincial level. So even the person that's going to be the president of the country has to be elected at the local level. And not only are those municipal representatives electing the state representatives amongst their own peers, but then they have representatives that represent women's organization, representatives that represent farmers, that represent students, that represent workers, the people that actually make the country run. And they are all elected to the provincial level, and that continues on to the national level. And then the national level, they do the same process in electing their cabinet, which is called the Council of State. And the Council of State then elects who's going to be president. And it's no money involved. And when they have constitutional, and they rewrite their constitution like every 20, 25 years, they'll add new things. They'll add LGBTQ rights to the Constitution, et cetera, and et cetera. Like I talked about the environmental, the family code was the last. And that's only done with consistent discussions at the neighborhood level, at the factory level, at the school level. And everybody says, oh, you take out this suggestion and we have this suggestion. And it's rewritten and rewritten, and they have these meetings over and over again until finally they come up with a consensus, the best that they can get, and then everybody votes on it. So when we talk about multi-party systems, we talk about which party has the most money to elect their representative. It's not based on the service to the country of that person like it would be known on the local level. You can't fool anybody with slick commercials to get into office. So to me, they've set up an example of democracy that's different in ours. And I don't think we can tell them, I don't think we can tell anybody that our democracy is better than anybody else's.
Yeah, that's interesting because I've been listening to a lot of the discussions about the emerging young governments in Africa, particularly the ones that are actually led by military people in Burkina Faso, in Chad, not Chad, but Burkina Faso, in Niger, and in Mali.
Mali,
they call themselves the
Sahel.
Alliance of the Sahel.
Yeah.
Alliance of the Sahel, Alliance of Sahelian states. But what they are questioning is the veracity, the honesty of so-called Western democracy, and whether what we know as Western democracy is really a ruse or is something that works against actual equality, egalitarian access and voice. And you've kind of described that. You've described a process where the people who ascend to serve ascend based on service in their local population, the wards, as you refer to in Minnesota. And out of that group, a provincial, and out of that group, a national leadership, but there's a direct connection between the voter. It's not two separate transactions. It's an integrated evolution of responsibility and accountability that really falls back to the individual voter in her or his community and other organized like labor and women and groups within the population. And so they're questioning that. And I think what they're saying is that there might be other models. We shouldn't just blindly accept this idea that what we've been told is democracy is the end all and be all, that there may be other ways to define and describe democracy itself that could be better, that better serve the principle and the spirit, the idea, and that we should examine whether the practices of the culture, you described it as the oligarchical culture, actually belie the notion of freedom and democracy. If that freedom and democracy that's being offered or proposed does not include healthcare, does not include education for everybody, does not include employment for everybody, does not include housing for everybody, what is it really but a system, a feeder system of privilege and lack of privilege that ultimately is in its nature a patriarchal system that advantages the few, the most powerful, and disadvantages the masses of people. So that's kind of the dilemma that we're looking at globally, I think, right now, but looking at more clearly now because we have the means to do so with telecommunications. And this conversation, I think, fits in that construct. We're going to organize this meeting with colleagues of yours from Cuba in the next couple of weeks. So go ahead. What are your thoughts?
So, yeah, we're talking about a world with the choice is domination, empire, and a world ordered by profit and power. In comparison to one, a world of emancipation, a world of sovereignty and free will, and a world grounded in human need and collective dignity. And I think in Minnesota, we are beginning to realize that we are connected with the rest of the world, with Cuba, with Venezuela, and with other countries, as you mentioned, in Africa and the Middle East that are under the boot of these powers. Now, it first started, one would go back to those fake videos of the Somali childcare. So they, with their fake propaganda, they created a reason which they called corruption, stealing resources, which then propagated ICE to come in.
Mm-hmm.
ICE was the thugs that they hired, just like they hire in all these other countries to create this incident in the streets that would justify using violence. And then, so they're creating that narrative that legitimizes militarism and chaos and sanctions. Sanctions that cut off, just like the administration, and I'm saying this happens under Republican and Democratic administrations. It makes no difference. They're both parties of power and domination. But they tried to cut off our child care funding. They tried to cut off our food stamp funding. They tried to cut off our health care funding. Those act like sanctions against. And then they made it so that people were afraid to do their regular daily things. They cut off our avenues of economic prosperity. So this is the same thing that happens in all these other countries and has happened in Cuba for over 6 decades. Now, how is it that a country can withstand those kinds of sanctions, those kinds of acts of violence for over 6 decades? They have to be together. They have to support each other. And we have to go back to the special period when the socialist bloc fell apart and the Soviet Union was dissolved. Cuba lost 2/3 of its economic power. And they were put in a situation like they're facing today. And at that time, it was known that the destruction of the Cuban Revolution would not be neutral, would not be a neutral event. It would be in a historic defeat for all those struggling against exploitation, racism, militarism, and imperial domination. And the Cuban people, there's just like when the Trump administration challenged the people of Minnesota. How did the people of Minnesota respond?
In the streets. In the streets.
In the streets. They responded by organizing.
40 below. Yep. Amazing.
To their neighbors,
Yep.
to do the things, to bring food. Well, that's the same thing they did in the special period. They began to create those community gardens. They started to live without oil. Yes, they had to go back to simple living. They had to be with a lot of luxuries, but they were able to withstand that imperial assault of taking away their resources and rebound and come back again. They called that building of that community and that organization, that was called Operation Zero. Today, they have more resources available to them. They have technology. Their computer science and their means of creating new inventions is unknown in this country, but anybody that knows Cuba knows that the way that they've kept those 1950 cars running is
genius.
Is a statement to the perseverance of the Cuban Revolution itself. Those 1950s cars in the streets, that's a symbol of the perseverance and the strength of the Cuban Revolution. And today, they are getting solar farms and solar power systems, not only from China, but also we are raising money here in the United States to send solar panels to Cuba. And they're creating small businesses and industries to do just that, to convert the country to solar power. They're doing everything that they can to raise their own food. And so I think today with that organization and the new technologies that they have available to them and the connection to the rest of the world, that they will be able to surmount this attack, this oil blockade, and others will come to their rescue. It's now internationally known that governments and civic organizations are organizing ships full of humanitarian aid, including solar panels, food, medical aid, that is going to flow into Cuba from all corners of the world, including the United States.
So what's the threat?
The committee is raising money.
What's the threat, though, of the tightening of the embargo? I mean, give me the story about the oil tankers that were under Russian flag, either that were prevented or deterred from delivering needed fuel to Cuba. What's going on with that? What's going to happen? I mean, this is a showdown, but the problem is the showdown is also happening simultaneously with blustery in Iran, blustery against the so-called allies of the U.S. over Greenland, and I think is not inconsistent with the showdown in Minneapolis and St. Paul. It's the same spirit driving all of that, and that is, as you said, Greg Klawe, is to demoralize resistance, to break resistance, and to allow people to accept a new narrative, to normalize the presence of a heavy-handed state and call that normal, to describe democracy as something that it is not, and have people genuflect to this raw and abusive power, and to reflect that they accept the inevitability of oligarchical control as a planetary necessity or reality, but it is not. That's just the story.
Yeah.
Talk about the resistance.
It's the breakdown of international order,
Mhm.
of all the conventions and treaties that were set up, that were accepted by all nations, including the United States. We as a government have signed on to this international laws and treaties and conventions to try to prevent world wars from happening.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this has been thrown out the window by the government in Washington. And why? They took the extraordinary steps of attacking Venezuela, a country that had no threat whatsoever. None of these countries have ever threatened the United States. They've always only wanted to cooperate.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, with Cuba itself, we have over 13 presidential administrations. We have archival records of the Cuban government coming to the United States saying, we want to cooperate. We want to trade with you. But it was never allowed by those in power. It was kept secret that these peaceful hands out to the government was ever mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
It was all about taking Cuba back to be in the colonial influence of the United States, to be that Las Vegas, that tourism playground of the rich and powerful. And so, yeah, we have a breakdown of international order and the conventions of international treaties and conventions. And now we're coming to a showdown where Mexico right now is in negotiations to try to bring oil to Cuba like they've always done.
Mm-hmm.
Mexico and the United States says, we will sanction you if you try to bring oil. And so the only country that has already been sanctioned out is Russia. They have nothing to lose. The United States can't sanction them anymore. And so they are preparing now to send oil. And because the United States has been pirating oil tankers from Russia, from Venezuela, to keep them from the global market, it seems likely that Russia will have to send naval ships with their oil tanker to break that blockade, which brings us back to the October missile crisis.
1962, I believe, right? 62?
Yep, exactly. November 19th, the 13 days of October. And
so what does that mean? I mean, how do you imagine that unfolding? What could happen? So I'm hearing that scenario is one that's likely, but really even that pales in comparison to what may be ahead with Iran, because of the dynamics are so much more compact because of the geography, with that community being in a powder keg of nations, right? And people seeing their lines of sovereignty at stake and at risk, as well as their sense of sovereignty being challenged by the West and by Washington in particular.
yeah,
How do you compare those two? And can they do them in tandem, or can the response of the people be not only in tandem but universal and global?
well, it's my analysis that the only response that can come is from the American people. That, like the people of Minnesota, we have to resist this new fascism that's happening from the halls of Washington, D.C., and the people that are there right now. And I think that means that here in Minnesota, we have to put extra pressure on our representatives. Now, we know that Ilhan Omar is not afraid to speak up.
That's right.
And because of that, she has been threatened so many times. And it's very important that the people of Minnesota, that the people of the 5th District protect our leaders like Ilhan. We have to create a moral and physical force that protects her wherever she is, whenever she's with us. And we have to get Amy Klobuchar. If Amy Klobuchar wants to be the governor of Minnesota, she has to step up and show us that she's got a backbone. Right now, she's not speaking up. She's supposed to be a champion of Cuba. Remember in the days when the Democrats had control. But it was all talk. Now she's got to step up and say something. She had the national platform when she was running for president. She still has that national platform. She has to step up and speak out. It's not about political consequences. This is a moral issue now.
One of our viewers on, I think he's on YouTube, The Big Cheese, put a post that you can react to. He says that he predicts that after regime change, he's saying that Trump will succeed, tourists, Cuba will be the #1 tourist attraction in the entire Caribbean because of corporate investment and Cuba's rich and diverse culture. And he also goes on to say he believes that Trump will win. I disagree, but I appreciate his laying it out there as a possibility. How do you respond to people that think that the Cuba's final erasure is a foregone conclusion? Cuba as a sovereign idea and as a culture, rather than as an appendage or colony a new colony of the U.S.? What do you think?
Well, that regime kind of change thing. I mean, even when they attacked Venezuela, it did not change their regime.
Mhm.
Maybe it made them realize that the overwhelming military power of a bully can affect them, but they've changed their strategy. But let me say that to make the Cuban people suffer in order to create that kind of world that this person mentioned is an act of heinous criminality.
Mhm.
It's like spousal terrorism.
Mhm.
It's bullying. And the fact is that we didn't have to do that for investment to be. Cuba has always welcomed investment.
Mhm.
They've always welcomed American tourists, just like they welcome Canadian and European tourism. And it's only the United States that's been blocking investment, blocking American businesses from doing business with Cuban businesses, blocking American people from being tourists in Cuba and enjoying the rich culture that they have. Cuba has not been blocking this world of coexistence. It's been the United States and those heinous criminals of Florida who in power, those people who used to control Cuba, like the mafia controlled
Mhm.
Las Vegas, or the
Mhm.
mafia did control Cuba. That's who wants Cuba in that position that this person that you recited
Mhm.
what he thought would happen wants to happen. He wants to turn it back into a domination of Cuba's culture, resources, their tourist resources, but all their other resources. Yeah, they've got the best rum and the best cigars. They have the best dancers and the best music. But how come we don't have Cuban bands playing in the United States?
Mhm.
People would flock to see Cuban bands. They flock to the Dakota. Whenever we get Cuban bands that they've had to actually leave the country in order to play internationally.
Right. That's right.
Yeah, they if they make money in the United States, they can't send that money back to Cuba.
Mhm.
It's illegal for any Cuban who makes money in the United States to send that money back to the people, their family, and their friends.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's the kind of way that we've turned this whole situation upside down so that people can recite those kinds of crazy outcomes that it started in Vietnam. You had to destroy the village in order to save it. That is colonial thinking.
Mhm.
That is patriarchal thinking. And that has to end because now international solidarity, now this new world order that people are beginning to see, and hopefully the people of the United States, through the example of Minnesota, are beginning to see that we have to change our operating system.
Mhm.
We have to go to a new operating system, not one where it's controlled by the algorithms of the powerful and rich, but the ones that the algorithms are controlled by human need and collective dignity. So now it's more important that this new internationalism, this solidarity, means defending and preserving the Cuban Revolution. As Vidal said in the special period, to defend this trench, this bastion of socialism, is the greatest service we can offer humanity. This is not a rhetorical flourish. It is a strategic and moral diagnosis of the new global conjuncture that we are in today. And the people know that it's happening.
So, I've been, Greg, asking guests of late to teleport themselves to a degree to the future and ask you to put on your futurist hat. And let's operate with the thought that, say it's 100 years from now or 200 years from now, and let's operate with the principle that we won. We won. What does that mean? What would the world be like differently? Now, you've referred to the need and the desire, but let me ask you to state it again from the conjecture that we're looking, say, in the year of 2126, and we can say definitively that our ideas prevailed, that we won. What will the world be like differently from what it is today? What do you think?
Let me say that the slogan of the Cuban people, a better world is possible. A better world where we have universal health care. Nobody is denied the health care that they need in order to be prosperous, productive. Everybody has access to education at all levels. People have guaranteed housing. The environment is protected. We begin to go away to a new system of running our energy needs through natural forces, the sun, the wind, the waves, the heat of the planet. It comes from building community and keeping those resources recycling back in our communities. And within our communities, we share with other communities within our state. And our states create communities that share with each other. And so, just like Cuba has been a beacon for internationalism, remember, during COVID, they not only had the highest amount of doctors per capita of any country in the world, but they sent doctors to 40 nations to help them overcome and deal with COVID, including Western nations like Italy. And everywhere they went, they were applauded. People would come out in the streets, bang pots, and sing as the Cuban doctors walked through the streets to thank them. What does the United States do? They try to stop that medical internationalism, that way that Cuba is sharing its human resources, that knowledge of the people that they've provided the education to with the rest of the world to help them build their own healthcare systems. The United States is in a process now of telling countries like Guatemala, Antigua, Brazil, even Mexico, get rid of your Cuban doctors that help the poor and the displaced, that our Western healthcare system has not set up to help. Tell them to leave those poor and displaced communities that never had healthcare before.
Mhm.
until the Cuban doctors came.
Mhm.
And you know the Cuban doctors are highly prized,
Mhm.
not only in the rest of the world, but here in the United States. And even today, Cuba offers free scholarships for people of color, people in poverty, to go study to become a doctor in Cuba for free. We have hundreds of doctors in the United States helping urban poor communities or rural reservations that have been given those gifts by Cuba for free. That was set up by the Black Caucus back in the 1990s during that
Mhm.
special period.
Yep.
That was Black congressman and Fidel came up with that program. But also we know, so instead of military, they're sending out medical people. They're sending out teachers to
Mhm.
help people read and write, to teach literacy in countries where areas of countries where they never had it before. They send out sport coaches to help people become involved in a sport. And you know that through sport, you build up your body and your mind.
Yep.
Sport provides an avenue for discipline and health,
And
that
teamwork. And teamwork.
teamwork.
Mhm.
Teamwork. So all those things, yes, Cuba has provided to the rest of the world, and the United States is trying to block that. It's
Let me pivot, Greg.
terrible.
Let me pivot a little bit and take a few minutes to talk about Jesse Jackson. Did you know
Ah.
him by any chance, or what do you know about his work, and what does he mean to the movement?
Well,
Before
thank you for
respond,
asking. Thank you for asking.
Before
Because
you
it was,
respond, let me just share this.
yes,
I'm looking at a report that came in from the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies mourning the passing of Reverend Jesse L. Jackson Sr., who they describe as a monumental figure in the American civil rights movement, also as a two-time presidential candidate and a lifelong champion of justice, equality, and Black political empowerment. Reverend Jackson was 84. And their statement just reminds people that Reverend Jackson dedicated his life to the belief that every person, regardless of race, class, or circumstance, deserved dignity. We're talking about that, opportunity, and a voice in the democratic process. That's exactly what we've been talking about for the past 50 minutes, Greg. And their acknowledgement of him says that from his early days, he was a young protege of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and he also became the founder of Operation Push and the Rainbow Coalition, which he built into one of the most consequential institutions in American public life. He was present with Dr. King at the Lorraine Motel on April 4th, 1968, and he spent the rest of his life carrying forward the unfinished work of the movement, registering voters, challenging corporate discrimination, negotiating the release of hostages abroad, and demanding that America live up to its promise. Well, I'll stop sharing that just to look at a memory and then have you come in, Greg, on this. I remember the pictures you see. You'll see them in the next several days of Jesse Jackson, Reverend Jackson, and others who were actually in the parking lot of the Lorraine Motel when Dr. King came out of his room on the second floor, was speaking to them from his balcony, right? When the shots rang out that took his life. And the question becomes, how much trauma does a person live with for the rest of his or her life, having been in a conversation with Dr. King at the moment of his execution? That's just a powerful thing. My own connection to that, Greg, is that the day before that, at that time, I was a 20-year-old sailor in the U.S. Navy. And I happened to be on leave or going on leave coming from Jacksonville, Florida through Atlanta, going to Worthington, Minnesota, where my family lived, right? And so when I was in the airport, I looked and saw one guy standing alone with a trench coat draped over his arm, sort of maybe deciding where to go. And I said, "Oh, that's Dr. King. Should I go say hi to him?" I had met Dr. King before because when I was a freshman at Morehouse College, I was involved in student protests. Dr. King led protests from the AU Center, the Atlanta University Center, of young people and community people who were protesting the Georgia legislature's refusal to seat Julian Bond as a state senator, duly elected by his constituents in Atlanta, and they refused to seat him because of his position against the war in Vietnam, right? So I saw Dr. King, I went and spoke to him, brief encounter. I call it a gift in retrospect because, and I don't remember the words he said, but the feeling he said was, go in peace, my son. That's kind of what the feeling was. And I was a young Turk, wanted to be activist, but I was in uniform as a military person and conflicted about my status as a sailor and my status as a Black man in America, that our military was part of the suppression, but you could also say part of the change towards liberation, because a lot of us came through that process thinking differently about our power to change things. I left that encounter heading to Minnesota. He left that encounter heading to Memphis to die.
Yeah.
What
Wow.
a thing. What a thing. So talk
Powerful-
about
Powerful
Jesse
memories.
Jackson. Yeah,
Yeah. I remember coming out of school as an 8th grader and hearing about the assassination of Martin Luther King and how it struck all of us as we left school. Everybody's head was hanging low, and everybody felt that sense of pain that was channeling through the country. And in regards to Jesse Jackson, I had the privilege of working with the Rainbow Coalition and furthering Reverend Jackson's nomination as the Democratic candidate for president in 1984. And at that time, I was living in Bemidji. I went to school at Bemidji State University, was living in Bemidji, and working with Paul Wellstone and other community members, we actually convinced Jesse Jackson to come to Bemidji, and he created the largest political rally in the history of the Bemidji area. Not since. Thousands of people came out to see him, filled the streets, filled the hall that he was speaking in. They had to set up, microphones outside the hall. It was the largest political rally or demonstration not since the 1917 presidential election
campaign of
the wobbly president
Okay.
candidate. I can't remember his name right now, but not since then has there been such a big political rally.
Mhm.
And so, I had the privilege of being with Jesse at that time, and then being elected as a Democratic candidate to the national convention in San Francisco. And before my eyes, they changed the rules so that he would not get the presidential nomination. That's when they created the super delegates
To make sure.
that he would not get the presidential, because the Democratic Party is a supporter of the imperial legacy of the United States. Yeah, they go hand in hand.
I also had a chance to meet with and talk to Reverend Jackson on several occasions. I actually was with him on his tour plane flying around Minnesota. Him and Paul Wellstone together. Making
Yes,
stops
yes,
in small towns.
yes.
I was part of that.
Yep.
Listen,
Paul
we're out
and
of time.
Jackie, yep.
What a wonderful conversation, Greg Clave, Minnesota Cuba Committee. Thanks just reflecting on these important issues and for reflecting on the life and work of Reverend Jesse Jackson. Rest in peace, Jesse Jackson. We'll come back shortly with more about Cuba. Go ahead.
Yeah, and one more thing.
Yep.
The Cuban Film Festival starts March 4th at the Main Cinema every Wednesday until April 1st. The Minnesota Cuban Film Festival, the 17th annual festival, is back.
And we'll have it in Insight News. Thank you. I'm Al McFarland. We'll see you next time.